I believe that my mother's intercessory prayers helped to bring this on. And then also there was the spark of a prayer inside of me that said, I don't want to die.
Hello, welcome back to Women Seeking Wholeness, a podcast for women who long to feel, express, and be who they truly are, here and now, body and soul. Today I'm speaking with Bridget Cook-Burch, a good friend of mine who I met through a collection of other women who were seeking wholeness. She has helped so many people just bring out the depth of their struggle through memoirs, and best-selling ones at that. She's really adept at helping us to put our past into perspective and claim it as a means to help evolve this hurting planet and heal other people through our vulnerability. We'll be talking about radical self-compassion. We'll be talking about how we can go into our greatest glory and develop our biggest strengths from what we've been through in the heroine's journey. I'm beyond thrilled to begin my podcast journey with the incomparable Bridget Cook. And she has become a dear friend of mine over the years and someone that I greatly admire and respect. She has a lot of personal power. She has a strong voice. And I'll just read a little bit about her aside from just my personal take on who she is and what she's about. She's a New York Times and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. Her books have been showcased on Oprah, Dateline, Good Morning America, and others. Where she really comes in and wants people to know about her work is that she has this real emphasis on the power of words and how they can transform your life. And that's happened in her own life. So she has really come to believe in that power to change the world. So I'll let her share a little bit more about her journey as we go along. I don't want to give away too much about her, but she's really adept at bringing people's stories out, especially people who have come from really traumatic or dangerous even, or really unhealthy and dysfunctional situations. Like FLDS leader Warren Jeffs, she helped Rebecca Musser share her story in The Witness Wear Red, which is one of my very favorite autobiographical memoirs. And also The Untold Story of a Serial Killer's Daughter with Melissa G. Moore. And I love that book as well. So I have been to Bridget's writing retreat. And I've also just spent time with her in friend situations and just being around her. But she does these amazing inspired writers retreats. She's got India, Ireland, Italy. Any reason why they all start with I don't know, but
it's kind of funny, and it wasn't on purpose. It was just part of the magic of the journey. So
awesome.
I'm all good.
Yeah, so you'll just be in for I was going to say in for a retreat, but in for a treat today as we kind of explore with her where she's been, where she is now, and where her journey is taking her. So welcome, Bridget.
Such an honor always, Cherie, to be able to spend time with you. You are one remarkable lady. And your audience is about to find out just how remarkable.
Oh, thank you. Well, can you share anything about your story? Because I know, again, that's sort of your zone of genius and sort of, I think you would agree with me, like kind of one of the reasons you're on earth right now is to bring out story and words and the power around that and owning our past. But can you share a little bit about your story?
Sure. And that's the thing, you get an author on and you have to watch that they don't take up the whole time with their story. As you know, I love a lot of people's stories, but I will tell you a little bit about mine. By the time I was 6 months of age, I had 3 sets of parents. So I was put up for adoption, was in foster care, and then came to my adoptive parents, who are just amazing, wonderful people. The only thing is that inherently I learned not to trust that people would stick around. So I became very fierily independent, always wanted to do things on my own. I thought that I had to unconsciously because, I was afraid to rely on someone. Fortunately, my parents had a lot of unconditional love, so they continued to shower that on me despite, crazy mistakes I made when I was younger, and was quite a tomboy. Uh, got into all kinds of trouble with that. As I grew a little bit older, I got in trouble in different ways. A lot of you can probably relate, but I was learning who I was and what I stood for. There was this spiritual part of me that wanted to become a nun. And then there was this party animal side of me that wanted to, have an adventurous life.
Oh, we've got both of those. Everyone's got them.
Right. People tease me, call me Sister Mary Bridget, but there came this point in my life where I just felt like I had made so many mistakes, and I was actually in the hospital and surrounded by all kinds of medical personnel. And then about 2:00 in the morning, I was listening to nurses outside in the corridor, and they were saying that I wasn't going to make it until the next morning. And I knew I was dying. And my roommate even said, you're dying, don't you? And I went into this place of what Sheree I would just call ultimate surrender, just ultimate surrender. And in doing so,
and how old were you at this time?
I was in my early 20s. So I was just barely 21 and, just struggling with life and working 3 jobs and going to school. And I had really done a number on my body, just really had hurt myself through all that stress and didn't know it. And then, when you're a student, you're like invincible and you stay up all night and, do whatever it takes to get your finals going the next day and things like that. And that's how I had been operating for months and really shredded my body. And so I had the most incredible thing that happened. 2 things. One is, since we're talking about wholeness, I'm just going to be upfront with you. I believe that my mother's intercessory prayers helped to bring this on. And then also there was the spark of a prayer inside of me that said, I don't want to die. I haven't fulfilled the measure of my creation. I haven't done what I've come to do. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew I hadn't done it yet. And there was this strong yearning inside of me to be able to live. So between those 2 things, I had the most beautiful, unconditional love that filled my room. Absolutely filled it in the form of what I would just call 2 presences. And I will tell you, I was told that I was being given a second chance at life. And it was delicious and beautiful. And there were some miraculous things that happened after that. But I will tell you this, that experience opened my eyes to the power of unconditional love and the power of the stories that we tell ourselves. And when we find those not to be true. Sheree, you don't know this because we haven't had a chance to talk for a little bit, but I'm going to share one other aspect. After that, I was able to work with gang members and the children of serial killers and cultists and different things in all different backgrounds and walks of life without judgment and with just love. It was a great gift. And that journey has sent me into some pretty remarkable places and even on the doorstep of a killer. It's just been amazing. But unconsciously, I was still carrying around this story of, why I was given away as a child. And what's interesting is I had an author who gave me a DNA test just recently. And she said, I really think that your story won't be finished until you do this. And I was a little bit hesitant because my adoptive family, like I said, just so amazing. But I went ahead, I did an ancestry DNA test and found a relative. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is because, even Einstein said there must be something deeply hidden behind things. And I have found that to be true in every aspect of my life and in the power of story, that there's always a deeper thread, a golden thread of support, of love, of miracles, of meaning behind our lives, that we're here for a purpose, and it's not abstract and it's not accidental. And our choices have so much to do with it. But every time we make a choice, we're so supported. So I went ahead and I did this DNA test, and I discovered an immediate relative who, get this, after they lived all across the country, and I've lived in different places across the country, discovered that they lived 7 minutes away from my house. And it was my birth mother's twin brother. I know, right? And then we find out that I have a first cousin who was my husband's doctor and my mother-in-law's boss, and another first cousin who is works for one of my best friends. It was
wow.
Craziest thing. The adoption took place out of state. They were from out of state, all of these things that happen. And yet here we all end up together. So in the last 3 months, I have been introduced and fallen in love with 59 new family members.
Oh my gosh, what?
I know. And
crazy.
Just this last weekend, I met my full blood brother and a half brother, and I met my father for the first time. And I had also met my mother. But I just have to tell you, the stories that unconsciously even that I had been telling myself since I was a little girl, that I wasn't good enough, I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't pretty enough, that they had to give me away, right?
And you were like gorgeous, and you have so much depth, and you're so smart. And like the fact you would tell yourself that story is really interesting to me.
Well, now it's interesting to me too, because I've come to discover that every person has that story to some degree or another. And I think part of the reason we're on the planet to gain wholeness is to discover ourselves beyond the lies, ourselves beyond the stories, and to put ourselves in a position of so much healing and to create so much love that we actually can write brand new chapters in our books. It's thrilling to me. And I keep seeing these miracles all around me, including in my own life. It's just beautiful.
I think that is, well, Bridget, that I have a lot of interesting dynamics in my life with adoption.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty open about this now, but for a while I was really protective, as like a skeleton in my closet or a big secret. But I am actually a birth mother. I placed a baby girl for adoption, coming up on almost 25 years ago. And it was a very shame promoting experience. It's something that you would not believe the stories I told. I was actually disfellowshipped from my church. I was really shunned by some of my friends at the time. My family had a really hard time with it, although they're very, very supportive. But I went and got a 1-bedroom apartment and just bathed in shame for almost my entire pregnancy. And I was 25 years old, so it wasn't like I was a teenager when this happened. I had 1 year of college left. But whenever I hear, we can go into my story and yours, and I'm seeing so many similarities already. I didn't know this about you, but my little Emma, my little 4-year-old, I was her third mother, and I got her when she was 4 months old. So, and it's really interesting that this happened 20 years after I placed. So I placed this daughter for adoption. And then I met my husband within a few months, and we were married. And then, there's only really 2 years between the first child Jeff and I had together, Noah, and the daughter that I placed for adoption, Wendy. There's only 2.5 years between them. And then we had, 3 kids in quick succession, and then a huge 7-year gap. And then these 2, I call them caboose babies. And when I talk about that term, when I'm overseas, no one knows what that means, but most Americans probably know what caboose baby means. But they're the caboose to my train. And they came when I was in my 40s, and they came through private, miraculous, separate adoptions. And the fact, when you talked about having 3 sets of parents in what was it, by age 3 months, 4 months?
6 months.
6 months. Yeah. Very, very similar to what I went through with Emma, getting her, being her third mother. And you would think that when that happens in early infancy, that it wouldn't have such an impact, right? But the changing of hands with that kind of dynamic, even at that young age, can create some interesting soul problems, soul displacement, fragmentation. Would you agree?
I would agree. I have not spoken with anyone who has been adopted that doesn't have some kind of a wound in relation to that. And doesn't mean that it can't be healed. It's just something to know, and then to be aware of, and then to be okay with, and then to, we each get to find our own answers. But I would suggest for an adoptive mother, as you are, and such a beautiful mom, I love seeing you with your kids, you're just absolutely amazing, is to just, to have, like, always hold the space for her healing. And I know that that's who you are. And so when something comes up, to go, yeah, it's natural for you to feel this way. Everybody does, and whether they're adopted or not, you're going to have some of these, because being human is really messy, right?
Oh my gosh, yes. And what's interesting is having the experience at that age, at age 25, and placing a baby for adoption. And there's so many layers and levels to it. I could talk about it for hours, but the reason that I placed her was because I wanted her to have a healthy life, emotionally and spiritually and physically.
Right.
And to think that she would have some kind of trauma or emotion based disconnection because of that choice I made is hard to hear. But at the same time, I know you're right. It doesn't matter how healthy the adoption is, and it doesn't matter how much love is there, and how much beauty and how ordained it is in the heavens, or how angels are behind it, or whatever. That adoptee and especially that birth mom have trauma around that experience, and even the adoptive parents, because they have their own story around why they are adopting and why they felt called to it and how long they've waited. And there's just so many things at play. So I'd love to get your take. I know we're taking a little tiny detour with adoption here, but it's a big part of your life. And I'm sure you formed some kind of identity crisis around that. So what is your take on that in terms of, like, something so heavy and how it can get healing both from the adoptee, like you are,
Mm-hmm.
and, like, what if you'd never met your birth parents? What if that was still a gaping hole for you?
Right. Well, what's so fascinating to me is to have this happen. I was a secret for 51 years. That's kind of wild as well. Not in my adoptive family, but certainly in my birth family. So there were, these different ramifications of that. But I would love to share with you two things. Number one is that I've done a lot of personal work, and so it wasn't as big a gaping hole as it might have been for me when I was in my 20s or 30s, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a little girl, I actually learned to have fun with it. I think that was part of my imagination building process was, when I was upset with my parents or something, I could pretend I came from royalty, and that at some point they would come and swoop me up and rescue me or whatever.
That fairy tale,
like,
that's a very, very common the fairy tale, like the grass is greener. That's very common
right.
for an adoptee, even in an open adoption. Because in my situation, I have always known and been a part of the daughter that I placed. I've always been a part of her life. It's been extremely open. And in fact, her middle name is Cherie, and her adoptive parents have decided to kind of go rogue and just let me be part of her life from the get-go. So yeah, that fairy tale thing, even if it's open or closed, is very typical for an adoptee.
Mm-hmm. And so, and a lot of times we think of, like, oh, trauma. But here's what I have discovered through the power of story, and I know you have with everything that you've experienced in the adoption realm and with your sister and all of these things, is that, some of the most difficult things, oh, sorry, that's my big puppy. Some of the most difficult things that we've ever been through and survive through actually end up being some of our greatest glory, our biggest strengths. So I think what I ended up developing was a lot of compassion, a lot of ability to see people for who they really were. I had the ability to enjoy people from all different backgrounds and walks of life because I knew I came from one place, but then I had been put in this other, I also had, because I've seen this over and over again, especially with genetics, and people have gotten really clued in and tied in with genetics over the last 20 years. But here's the thing is oftentimes we go, oh, mom had cancer, I'm getting cancer. Whether that's a conscious belief or unconscious belief. But when you're adopted, if you don't know your adopted parent or your birth parents, you don't go into life with these prefix beliefs. And so, and we're finding out more and more and more about how the brain, especially in this wholeness arena, right? How the brain and what we believe actually will manifest in our bodies.
Yeah.
And so I had that ability of, oh, well, I didn't have to claim any of the illnesses that my adopted family had because I was like, that doesn't have to be me. And
interesting.
Yeah. And how we age and what we look like when we age and what we do. There's just some fascinating things. I was talking to Deepak Chopra because I had interviewed some people that had split personalities due to trauma when they were children. And I was telling him that if I was interviewing one personality, they might have brown eyes. But then if I was interviewing another personality, that they could have blue or a hazel. And I thought he would be really surprised, and he wasn't. So should we get this? He said, this goes to show how powerful the brain is and what it manifests in our body. He said, you can have people with split personalities and they can actually have two different blood types in their body. Wow. You can actually have one personality that will manifest a certain disease and another personality that will have absolutely no signs of that disease in their blood or any of their blood work or any physical manifestation, but they might have a different one. And I just thought, oh my goodness, how powerful our brains are and how powerful the stories that we tell ourselves. And so that's become a really powerful part of my work is how do we get rid of the stories that we've been telling ourselves that don't serve us? And how do we create a new story? Because I'll tell you what, there is like an aspect of life that is so beautiful if you can look at your past like you have done, no longer allow yourself to be immersed in shame, to recognize you were in the perfect place at the perfect time, giving birth to this beautiful baby and allowing her to have a greater life. And then when we heal from our past, then we become in a unique position to actually be a leader on the planet, to be a healer, to be someone that can utilize our story for a much greater good. And then it's almost as if we have a whole nother life in front of us. And I've just watched this transformation and rebirth of people over and over again. And this is why I'm still just so in love with the human soul.
Yeah.
Can't tell I'm passionate about that, can you? Sorry, go on and on.
I know. No, me too. You know what? This time in my life, I'm starting to realize just how complex and mysterious and literally amazing. I know that's a superlative, but the soul is, how we undermine the power of it.
Yeah. How we undermine it and we fail to recognize it. But then the opposite of that is when we choose to recognize it, how many miracles we can, number one, make manifest, and number two, recognize as they make themselves manifest. Because as you know, we're supported in marvelous ways.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you this. I want to go back to what you were saying. A couple of things really stood out to me. You talked about a golden thread and how that's kind of was tied into sort of like what you learned when you were given a second chance at life during your near-death experience. Can you expound a little bit more on what that is?
On that golden thread?
Yeah, you talked about a golden thread. And
Yeah. Well, I've noticed this. I don't know how many people have done any work with Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey,
mm,
but I'll tell you what, I have seen these patterns that continue to evolve, especially in really powerful people. And what I have noticed is, people who have been through some of the greatest suffering or the depths of hell or the greatest darkness, they also have a penchant to hold the greatest light, the greatest compassion, the greatest charity. There's just something really dynamic about that, and I don't say that in a way of, well, gosh, if you don't have a serial killer for a father, then you lose. It's not like that. It's recognizing that wherever the messiness is in life has a lot to do with that golden thread. Wherever you have struggled the most, wherever your self-esteem has really taken falls, wherever you have found that you have floundered, is oftentimes where the beginning of that thread comes. Because as humans, we're meant to overcome obstacles. We're meant to face trials so that we have an opportunity to see our greatest light on the other side. We don't learn unless we come up against something. It's like when you're a weightlifter. I was a bodybuilder for quite a long time in college, and you're tearing down your muscle, but then you're
yeah.
building it back up. But you can't have those amazing experiences unless you're willing to do the tearing down so that you can have the building back up of it. And a lot of times as humans, like, we're always looking for the easiest way out, the area where we can just enjoy. We kind of want to skate along in life. We're
Yeah.
like, well, maybe when, I get that raise, I'll be happy. Or maybe and we're always doing this somewhere in the future. And what I'm discovering with that golden thread of story is that is your key to your greatest happiness. And so instead of walking away from trials and being, adverse to them and trying to, run away from them with addiction or, go around your path, instead staying on your path and getting clear about the messiness, and then seeing, what have I developed? What are the lessons? What are the greatest gifts that are coming to me because of this trial? All of a sudden, you're going to see miracle after miracle after miracle because you've attached yourself to that golden thread. It's just amazing to me.
I love that imagery. And I'm a huge Joseph Campbell fan, the hero's journey. There's also a woman, I can't remember her name. She did the heroine's journey. It's more of a feminist take on the hero's journey, but it's the same concept. But, I think we crave adventure. And so there's this like belief we have somewhere, like complacency, or maybe the better word is comfortability. When I'm comfortable, then maybe all this other stuff will fall into place. But what you're saying, and what I totally resonate with, is that the for lack of a better phrase, the further you fall, or the deeper the trauma or whatever, the deeper the experience that you've gone, and the depth, to the greater the ascension, and the more capacity you have to hold light and truth and all of the goodness.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Because every human life is going to have some sorrow, some loss, some sadness, some drama. You don't have to make it up. It's there.
Yeah, it'll show up.
Like, I don't know. I know some people that do love to live in drama and create more, but most of us, we're just going along trying to get out of it or trying to figure our way,
Right.
And it's the facing of it and no longer being afraid or ashamed. There's just great miracles in that, and going, being human is just messy. So I'm going to make mistakes, and I have made mistakes, but now I'm going to be vulnerable and open about them, and no longer worried about what other people think of me. And I think as women in particular, that is such a struggle for us, because we want to be liked. We want to be beautiful, look beautiful, be loved others. We want all of these amazing things.
Right.
And sometimes we feel like we have to cover up a piece of ourselves in order to please or get along. And what I'm finding, and what women leaders around the world are finding, is no more compartmentalizing, no more cutting parts of ourselves off, no more cutting away. It's just time for us to be whole and beautiful and carry that goddess energy, is what I like to call it.
I love it. Uh, I follow a spiritual teacher who talks about the highest level of spirituality being integration.
Hmm.
And basically, it's wholeness in a sense. But I think some of the programming we've received in some of our faith traditions, it's like you're broken and you got to fix yourself and you got to repent. These things, and those things have value as long as there's not shame attached to it.
Right.
But we want to erase those experiences. We want to remove them from our psyche, and they don't ever go away. I mean, you don't, it's impossible. Everything's recorded.
Yeah.
So when you accept and integrate those pieces of you, then and there's no longer the energy of shame or fear around what people think. It's just like, yep, this happened to me when I was 20. And yep, this has happened to me last week. And 5 minutes ago, I just had a really, explosive anger episode, whatever it is. When we learn to integrate those pieces to ourselves, that's how we attain wholeness rather than the denial of our experiences. But do you think there's a fine line between, like you're talking about, some people create drama because there's kind of addiction around, like, hey, if I can create all this explosive set of circumstances around me and subdue it, that gives me adventure. So,
Mhm.
how do you, in the craving that we have in our souls to have adventure and to be on that hero's journey, how do you do that in a healthy way? That's the first part of it, and then not be in the shame of what you've experienced.
Especially if you find that you are creating drama. And
Yeah,
then not
yeah.
being in the middle of
I
it.
think we all do that, even if we don't have the intention. We like spice in life. We like the adventure. We like helping people, and
Yeah.
so there's a dysfunctional way we go about it sometimes, and sometimes it's completely subconscious.
Hmm. And there's very healthy people too that sometimes will go off on a tangent or create drama in a certain area, but the healthier you are, the quicker you recognize it, and you're like, oh, this is interesting. Look what I just did,
Yeah.
or look what I'm doing. And then you begin to make, a different choice. But when you're first started on your journey too, it's really important because our society, and this is worldwide, and this is every religion that I've encountered. If something's really steeped for centuries in a religion, and believe me, I love spirituality. There's just some areas of religion that has kept people steeped in that shame, as you were talking about, like what you did for most of your pregnancy, right? And we've got to find ways, and that's the power of transparency and vulnerability. Is that is to choose. I'm sorry, my puppy just keeps wanting to go outside. Such a beautiful day. Is to choose to be transparent. Therefore, the shame no longer has power over us. And I will tell you something, a lot of people create drama so that they don't have to look at the underlying issues that are plaguing them. So it's an addiction, just like anything else, Oh, I don't want to look at that problem. I'm going to eat some food, or I'm going to go take this drink, or I'm going to create some drama. And it's whatever it is, it's to not look at what is festering underneath. And so when you said, we have tendency to want to kind of cover it up, that's a big human tendency. And as you know, what you resist persists. And I used to hate that particular terminology because I'm like, wow. I don't like that. But we recognized, through the last several decades in particular, is just that, um, you know, anything that we push down, try to hide from, are not willing to take a look at, it's going to show up in another form,
Yeah,
in another person, in another situation until we choose to take a look at it. Right. But
absolutely.
here's the cool part.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, here's the cool part is that we have the ability to choose moment to moment to moment. Like, even if our pattern has been drama all of our lives, all of a sudden we can say, you know what, choosing out of that. And then bam, our life changes like in that moment. So there's all kinds of ways that we can, take a look at this, and learning even through tragedy can be really yummy, can be really, really yummy.
Yeah. And I mean, there has been a resurgence, I think, uh, in the last maybe 5 years. You've got like Brene Brown and Oprah, and they're always talking about the power of vulnerability and how we all want to belong. And so, people are, I think, people are realizing that social media posts like, the whitewashed version of our lives, it can be inspiring, but really the true way to inspire someone is to help them climb into the valleys of your life, and not in a dysfunctional way, like not in a way of like necessarily like attention seeking, but more of an empowerment place. Like, hey, I'm right here on the journey with you. This is what I experienced. And I know you're really adept at getting people to those places. And I think it's because you hold form for safety, because you don't give off judgment at all. Um, how do you foster that? Like, what are some tips you have for being a safe space? Number one, for yourself to let whatever's brewing underneath and whatever we're avoiding expressing or claiming from our past. So, how do we first create that safety within ourselves? And then, how do we do that for others?
Well, the safety in ourselves, I think, um, Cherie, and I know you've been on this personal journey yourself because you've become this for so many others. We have to learn how to be gentle with ourselves, right? We have to learn how to be kind, how to be able to face our past mistakes and our current ones. We're humans, so we're going to continue to make mistakes so we can learn. And a lot of times we have this crazy view of some, lofty perfection that we think that we need to attain. And the greatest philosophers and scholars and spiritualists and, what they have determined is we're supposed to be here to learn. And that means continued risk of making a mistake. So the number one, I think, is the gentleness on our own journey. Because if you can't do that for yourself, you can't do it for another person. But the
Absolutely.
moment, yeah, the moment you can do it for yourself, you find the ability to do that for someone else. And I think it's really important to develop that space of non-judgment, because it's the ultimate validation of another human being, is to say, I accept you just as you are. No changes needed. Nothing, right now in this moment, you are perfectly you in my eyes. And there's incredible safety and validation in that. And I think the other thing is like, I love the power of story, but I also know the power of allowing someone to be the storyteller. Like, I'm a storyteller of a lot of people's stories, but only when they have shared whatever they've shared in confidence and have gotten to the point where they're healthy in that story and they're sharing that story, then I will share the story. Does that make sense?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I'm a safe place for them to come and to be able to share that and to grow and to be transformed by their own power and their own story. And then when they're more healed, then I'll share some aspects of that. But safety is really, really important. So it means not only the listening, but also not the sharing until they're ready.
Yeah. And that takes a real development of trust, because for someone who's walked through, I mean, that's why people spend years in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they wait until, and I think the body sends signals when it's time for something to surface. I don't think that. I know that. And
Yeah.
so when someone's going through a healing crisis where they're having psychosomatic symptoms or flashbacks, or their relationships are all of a sudden they want to isolate, whatever, depression is showing up, it's their body's way of saying, okay, it's time.
Yeah.
And your body will always tell the truth. But I love what you're saying about it's kind of like radical self-compassion, because a lot of people, they don't know why their relationships aren't working right. They don't know why they're not experiencing success in their businesses or whatever, or they're not financially solvent or whatever. And a lot of times that's linked into unexpressed emotion, or um, the soul not having safety to find true creative expression.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the concept of just being just opening up a safe space within your soul and within your being to let whatever needs to come out, come out. And sometimes it's therapeutic stories. Sometimes, I mean, do you have a certain process that you take people through if they know they've got something in them, but because for me, you know this because you've worked with me, I have a lot of really deep experiences I've walked through and a lot of really pronounced experiences, but I'm afraid to put it down because I'm afraid I'm going to re-experience that by
Mm-hmm.
by getting it out. But at the same time, I mean, my logic brain is like, oh, it's fine. It's totally safe now.
Right. Well, and a lot of times too, when you were going through that pain, you had to do whatever you could do in the moment to survive. And sometimes that meant you only felt a certain amount. And if it's showing up in your body, it means it needs to be released, so that you don't have like a physical manifestation of disease. And so then it means that you're meant to experience those emotions. And therefore, you can do something very significant, Cherie, and that is to put it down, to acknowledge it, and then rise beyond the story. Because our stories are powerful, but they can also hold us hostage in those places. And the longer we put off those emotions can be even worse. But the moment we put those down and we acknowledge it, then the body's like, thank you for acknowledging the pain that I've been holding along. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's almost like an act of validation,
Yes.
to take it from more of an ethereal, um, maybe removed experience and putting it down in a tangible form. And it's a place of acknowledgement. I've heard of people just getting their deepest, darkest secret or most traumatic thing or most shame producing thing they've ever, and then just writing it down and then like burning it. But I think for a writer, because I know you're a writer, I'm a writer, I get really perfectionistic around sharing the story in a way that will be received the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at that and thought, man, am I also doing that not just with writing? Am I doing that with integrating other pieces of me to look a certain way or act a certain way or say certain things so that I'm received admirably by others, or not just admirably? It's not even about that. It's, well, they want to be my friend if they knew this, or you know what I mean? Or if I was really honest.
Right. And it's important to know, Cherie, that's a really tribal need, right? It's built into our DNA.
Yeah.
Because for centuries, if our tribe didn't accept us and love us, guess what? We might not be able to survive. And so, we have that passed down from generation to generation to generation. And so to take a look at it and go, okay, well, that's where that fear is coming from. But I will also say this, like in my writers' retreats, one of the things we do is we handle some of that messy stuff, and we give an opportunity for people to have those experiences without it being perfect. and being received anyway. And it's so healing. It's incredible to me what happens with that. So one of the things though is that it's just like we talked about, you've got to be gentle with yourself and create that space before you can do it for others. One thing I will tell you, when someone's been through a lot of trauma, like what you've been through, I will always suggest, please write it first for yourself and write it all. Write every nuance. Acknowledge every emotion that you went through, every issue, every problem. And then when you go back to do the rewrite, you're going to keep your avatar in mind, that person that you're like, what is the greatest gift that I can give them through this story? And so you have 2 drafts at least, right? For really well done books, you're going to have several drafts. But you have that first draft that's just for you and it's sacred. And sometimes you will burn it because sometimes it's like throwing up on the page. Sometimes there's poison that pours out.
I'm going to use a swear word right now, but Anne Lamott calls it the shitty first draft.
Yeah, right. And she's wonderful and wonderfully expressive. I just absolutely adore her.
I do too.
Yeah. And so, but she's also one that says, like, if people didn't want you to write them into a book, they should have behaved better, right?
So true.
That sometimes the things that happen to you, as well as the choices that you make, sometimes they're just excruciatingly painful. So it's important for you to validate that. But then when you go back and then give yourself time to write it for your audience, for your avatar in particular, then there's that beautiful intimacy and you're not revealing, tangents. You're straight on course because you're saying, this is now, when we talk about the hero's journey and the shero's journey, right? You come back into the ordinary world and this time you have a gift. So when you're writing it for yourself, you're still in the dark cave. You're still having to face yourself. You're still having to be there in all of your humanness. But then once you've faced yourself, you pick back up your sword and your shield, and you now have a gift as well to bring back. And that second draft, that third draft, that is your gift to the world when you're ready to reveal that. But I'll tell you what, if you try to go straight to that draft, I will guarantee you that there will be some unearthed things still inside of you that need to be validated in one way, shape, or form. So give yourself the gift of that first shitty draft of the first one, right? And sometimes it's like bleeding on the page. That's okay. In fact, the more you do that, the better, because then when you go back to do the rewrite, you're like, oh yeah, I can do this because you've already felt the emotion. You've already gone to
journeyed through that. You've already been in the valley and you allowed that. I love what you're saying. And I have a little black journal that I actually started this year. Mm-hmm. And it's probably almost 3/4 full. It isn't about my life experiences. It's about things that I'm currently processing that are really, really driving me, that I'm super mad about, or I'm trying to wrap my head around. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like the shaking your fist at God journal.
Yeah.
It's just stuff I have to get out. I have to do it. And there's no safe space for me to do it. I'm not even going to tell my husband about some of the stuff that I'm processing. I'm not even going to, tell my parents or my sisters or my best friend, or certainly not online or to my people in my tribe. But it's something I'm wrestling with. And so if I don't put it down, it's going to get lost. And it's going to come, like you said, it's going to come back in another form. And here I am, turning 50 years old, and I'm just now realizing the power of not just putting something on a shelf and leaving it there thinking someday I'll get to it. But if I have a running dialogue with myself around it, at least I know that it's valid. It's something that's not sitting right with me.
Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful. And what a wonderful and marvelous way to get those emotions out so that they're not sitting for long periods in your body, which is great. And that's why I think too, you're one of the more healthier human beings that I know, because you're looking at things immediately instead of shoving them down. And I would like to share one other piece because, you know, Stephen Covey, who wrote the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he kind of talks about this 8th step, which is going out and sharing what you've learned, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I would love to express with that is how much healing I have seen. You know, obviously I'm in the realm of authors and speakers and entrepreneurs and CEOs and people who are, you know, utilizing story in that way quite a bit. But just in people's personal lives and on the screen and other places, I have just seen so many miracles happen because you recognize you're not alone. And the people that you're touching recognize that they're not alone. I remember being up at Sundance last year, and actually it was the year before last, and met a producer who had produced an extraordinary documentary about these girls in Baltimore. And they were young Black African-American girls that, you know, they were going to this high school that expected them to graduate from college, not just high school, but from college. And for many of them, this was first generation in their family. And for many of them, Cherie, they were going through things like, you know, not having food in their home for 3 days. Having the electricity turned off again in a cold winter, having, you know, these different things. But here's the crazy part. The girls got to go up and watch this documentary in Sundance. And the entire theater was giving them a standing ovation, and they were down in front. And they could have cared less about all of the accolades and things that were coming their way. They had tears streaming down their face because it was the first time they'd seen this film. And they hadn't known that someone else that they loved and cherished so much had their power being turned off, had experienced abuse in their home, had not had food in their cupboards. There were all of these shared tragedies that somehow were like, I didn't know that about you. And then it was made lighter, and they recognized they were not alone. And these girls, arm in arm, you know, come out of the theater and they shake hands and do their thing, and then arm in arm make their way down the streets of Park City in just, you know, absolute glory and delight in one another, that they had been through that, survived, and now they were on the other side, and they were all working towards their college career. It just was this beautiful thing. So what I want to share with you is it's important to face the past. Then it's important for us to be seeing what our patterns are now, but it's also important for us to share what we've learned, because then the wholeness takes place. Then we know we're not alone, but also our gift becomes the gift of someone else, and maybe a little impetus for them to be able to do the healing for their own lives. There's great power in that, and I encourage people not to underestimate the power of their story.
Wow, that's incredible. I love, you know, bringing that circle of, you know, kind of owning your past or facing it, having the courage. That takes a lot of courage. All of this stuff takes courage. And I love that imagery of those girls from Baltimore walking arm in arm and that shared compassion. And I really do think it's about unity. I think that's what we're moving towards. We're all just bumbling infants in that process and separating ego and just trying to come together with a shared compassion. And I think the fear of exposing our story or our past or whatever comes from the deepest fear is that we'll be rejected by other people, but it's actually going to unite us instead of divide us. And then I love how it's kind of like threefold, right? We face the past, like you said, and then we look at what patterns are happening now. And then once we recognize that and we can integrate the past, then our next step, the obvious step, is to share our journey and our gifts from those journeys, what we brought back from the hero's journey, and sharing that with other people. And that's what you're doing.
Yes, it's the great elixir of life. It really is. That's the golden thread. So I just get excited about it. And I love seeing that take place with you and your trajectory and your learning, and what you're doing as you're developing even further your gifts and then sharing them with others. I'm really grateful to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. And you and I are still going to be journeying this year as I continue to get that book done. I actually have 2 of them that I'm working on, and
surprise.
Yeah. So there's the If She Could Speak, and then there's the And She Was Made Whole. And I'm trying to figure out in which context each book belongs. And they may be one book, but we'll talk about that later. That's not the place. It's not the place. But
That's right.
But you have been really pivotal in my owning my voice and stories. And so I thank you for your time today, for your soul and what you offer to this, not only to the people who are listening here, but to just the planet in general. You're amazing. So thank you so much for your time, Bridget. And then how can people, how can people find you? Like what's the best way they can see what you're about?
Well, you can look me up on Facebook, and just to clarify, it's Bridget Cook-Burch.
Burch. Yeah, I always leave off your last. I'm sorry.
That's okay. You knew me back when. So Bridget Cook-Burch. And also an easy way is bridgetinspires.com. That's my website. But I'd love to have a conversation with you. So please feel free to reach out on Facebook or LinkedIn or my website. And I would love to get to know you and your journey and your story.
Yes. And let me just tell you, her writing retreats are amazing. So if you have a story in you, we all do. But if you've had a burning desire to get your story into written form and to write a book, she is an amazing, amazing guide in that process. I can't recommend her enough. So, yay!
Thank you.
Okay. Well, have a beautiful afternoon. And thank you again for your time, Bridget. And we will definitely be directing people to what you have to offer. But this is just part of our hero's journey. And I'm glad that we've aligned forces in each of our respective journeys.
Me as well. Thank you so much. It's been a great honor and pleasure. And you have a beautiful day as well.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks again to Bridget for imparting such amazing wisdom. We really do have to go into a cave, into the darkness and into the depth before we can emerge with greater light and clarity about our mission and purpose and those we are meant to reach and heal. And that really is the final step, is to take what you've garnered and learned and experienced and go out and share it with the world. I've got a really beautiful downloadable leadership bundle on my website, cherieburton.com. So check that out as a freebie. Kind of a leadership essentials collection with some fun multi-sensory tools. And check out Bridget's website. She's got really amazing writing workshops, and she and I are working together actually so that I can bring out my story and my book later this year. But no matter what you're reaching, teaching, sharing, or experiencing, please capture it and write it down, because your posterity and the world needs it.